Welcome everyone to the Snuneymuxw Culture and Lives Lived presentations. Today is our fourth presentation in the series and the final one, and Dave Bodaly will be talking about culture today. And as a reminder, I mentioned this last time, we are actually going to have four additional programs going on January, February of 2021. So stay tuned for information on that. It will be widely available in the newsletter, the GAC newsletter, and also on Facebook. So watch out for that, and we'll have a Zoom sign up. So without further ado, I am going to welcome Dave Bodaly.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, in our cultural ways, when we're thankful, we're glad to be at a gathering, we bring our hands in front of us and you shake them twice and say Haitshka, which means thank you in our language. And I'm honored again today. Thank you, Carol, for coordinating all this. And I'm honored in a different realm now of us doing the Zoom meetings now. I'm starting to get the hang of it and start to get the feel of it, and talking to my computer in the corner is not the same anymore. But what we're going to do, we're going to start with a little video, but it's going to tell the stories about this here. And the video that she's going to show was one that was sponsored by the Nanaimo Food Share. And this was one of the first videos this was done this year. In total, this year has been a very unique year in so many ways. We had 5 movies made about me this year, and 2 of them were with Bo here, and Bo was in this one here when he was supporting me in drumming. So we're going to play that one first, and it's about 9 minutes, 9:55 or something, but it's interesting to see what my work is on Sesatchin Island, a place of healing and renewal of our spirit. And we'll see how that goes as a video. Okay, Carol? Awesome. And any questions, please type them in, and then as you see something along the way, and by the end, we'll go through it and see. Okay. We're happy that you're able to join us. We're happy that you're able to be part of our celebration today. The song I'm going to sing is called our Snuneymuxw Welcome Song. It was sung by our ancestors here, the man that gifted it to our community, and we sing this whenever we have our first gatherings. And this being our first gathering on the island, I thought it would be appropriate to do this. The Europeans came here, our village site was all where it presently is, to the high rise here, all the way along the shore to Departure Bay. And there was over 10,000 people lived here. When Captain Vancouver came in his tall ship, he came in the harbor here, our canoes, we came out from our villages and went to greet him. And he said, "What place is this?" Snuneymuxw. Oh, Nanaimo? Nanaimo. On the island here at the back of Mark Bay, here we had a village site, and we have another village site was just to the right of this totem pole here. And then another one was in the very north and it was right across from Steelnup. So we had a lot of contact with people here. These were seasonal villages though, because the village could only be here when this little herring are running through. And they would make nets, and those nets were made out of stinging nettle. And so they make dip nets, and you can dip them and scoop the little herring as they're going past. So sometimes our people would even bring branches and tie them to the shores so that those herring could lay eggs on them. And so then sometimes we'd collect some of those eggs, but we'd never take all of them, we'd just take some of them. So when I told about the transformer coming in the form of an eagle, well, the situation here was, it was in the grasses at that point over there. And the grass was quite tall in the summer. This transformer's name was Scales. And he was walking here, and he seen in the tall grass, he seen an eagle. An eagle is called a yahuala, and it was struggling in the grass. And as he got closer, he seen there was a raccoon had the eagle by its legs. And the raccoon was called a halhales in our language. And so he asked the raccoon, "Why are you taking this eagle's legs?" And the raccoon thought for a long while and said, "If I hold on long enough, I'm going to learn how to fly." No, that's never going to happen. And how did you come to get the eagle's legs in the first place? Well, grass was tall, and I snuck through the grass, and he didn't see me, and I was able to grab him. And he says, "No, that's not going to happen anymore either. So from this day forward, I'm going to make you white, so you can never sneak up on anyone anymore. And to remember your bad deed from this day, I'm going to make 1 every 10 of your babies white." And someone said they seen the mother walking over here on the shore, and she had a baby white one with her regular baby ones, and sure, an eagle swooped and grabbed that white one. And when we say there's 1 in every 10 baby ones, we have 7 white ones on this island. Oh. Next story I'll share with you is about the grove we walk through in the open area here. This is called a Gary Oak Grove. And does anyone know what kind of plant used to grow underneath the Gary Oak Grove, which was very important to First Nations?
The camas?
The camas, yes, the camas plant, camas flower is very sacred and very important as a trade commodity within our community. In the summertime, they could go and dig the bulbs of the camas, and it was like a potato. And they could collect all those bulbs, and you could dry those out and crush them up, and it would become like flour. And we could make camas bread from it. But while it's crushed up in that dried state, we'd pack it and we would trade it. They found traces of it in California. The starch that came from the camas was very helpful in balancing our diet, because with so much foods we have, it's a very rich diet, and we need to have that starch to balance it. The tree over here is the largest Gary Oak tree we have on the island here, and on the back side it reaches into the ocean. And this one, they said, was over 400 years old. So this is the salal bush. The berries that come from it are known now as a superfruit. They're ready about the last week of August and the first 2 weeks of September, then they start drying out. One of the stories that comes from the salal was that many years ago in our community, one of our ancestors seen a deer, and a deer is called a hoppet in our language, and it was in the water and it was shaking its leg, and they noticed that the leg was bleeding because the deer must have cut itself on something. And after they finished washing its leg off, the deer came out and started picking some of the salal leaves from the plant here. And instead of eating them, it chewed them up, and it made them into a paste, and it put it on that cut, and it stopped bleeding. So there's a coagulative in the leaves that causes blood to stop flowing, and that was what was very important for our people. Nowadays we'll make jams and jellies from them. I've made it many times myself, but in the old ways they would pick up and then mash it up and find like a granite or smooth rock somewhere and pour that paste onto that rock, and after it dries you could peel it off and it would be like a fruit leather, and that could be kept for later dates. So this is the pitch from the Douglas fir tree. The pitch was very important. That's coming off the tree here, because that pitch, if we had a cut on our arm or something, we could use that pitch and you could pinch it shut and it would be like a bandage prior to European contact. This was important to be used with the salal bush for the women when they're on their moon. It was important to have the two items together. This also is important that if we had a dry throat or something, we can take some portions of the pitch as pure, boil it in hot water, and you can sip that hot water and it cleanses your throat. You don't want to take huge amounts of it, but just enough so that you have that inside your throat. So big hi to every one of you for being here. In a cultural way, I'd say I bring my hand in a counterclockwise direction past everybody, saying hi tseepka. Thank you to all of you for being here. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Carol, for coordinating that. And that was something that was exciting to be part of this year. It was the first year we had ever had recordings done of the stories. We had Celestine was Celestine Alec from Snuneymuxw was our former tour guide, and she had been doing this for over 10 years. And there was a few of small little bits of her stories had been shared through Shaw and a few other organizations, but none to the extent of this one. So I was real honored to be part of this and helping coordinate it all. Sometimes I was talking really fast, I noticed, because I was nervous. First time ever for it. Is there any thoughts or comments about that part of it? No worries if there, because sometimes we see a view of something that's already out there. So this was been recorded in March this year, but it had been released on the Food Share website, but this is the first time that I've had a chance to share it with any of people that I care for and the organizations that I've worked with. And it's been an honor to share that. So, and when I do tours, each of them are a little bit different, but they're the ones on Sasatchewan Island are basically to try and promote our island there. So those of you that have tuned in a couple of weeks ago when my business partner Bo Wagner was talking, we're working with the museum, or sorry, with the island now, Sasatchewan, to try and find a cedar tree on Sasatchewan that we may be able to fall and may be able to make it into a canoe on the island. And that's going to be a tourist attraction next year in the spring. Now with the social distancing, everyone has to be on their own. We may have times where we may be able to run it as a Zoom or a live feed just through Facebook or something, so people can see what kind of work the progress is. So we're looking at possibly in May and June of next year if all things come together. We're still working on all the details within that, but we're having fun in the meantime, even though we have to socially distance so much. This Wednesday, I have a tour in the community here, and we're going to walk around the Collier Dam, and it's with the Comox School, bringing I think 16 students down. So of course, as all of them are required to wear a mask on their journeys and whatnot, it'll still be interesting to share with them some stories about it and whatnot. So there's so many different areas that I'm trying to reach out with, and I just had a meeting with the museum in Nanaimo, and now they're willing to support in having the cedar materials brought to their location and then distributed to the individuals who are going to take a cedar weaving class. And then through that cedar weaving class, I'll pass that information out through Zoom. And there'll be a distance participation, but we're hoping for some good turnouts in that another area. So.
Dave, I'm just going to read some of the items that have come up in the chat so we don't fall too far behind.
Okay.
So Louise said, thank you. Very cool to see the plants. Sybil, are you hoping to do more tours on Saskatchewan when the pandemic is over?
Yes, for sure. This year we only started them on July 19th was the first open tour, but they're on a much smaller group to a maximum of 10 people. And each of them were within that limit. And then all of our social distancing rules in place also. And so it was a very positive gathering. But we're prior to this year, my last year, I had 36 tours for the year. So it was very busy. And the year before that was only 18 tours. So it's really doubling very quickly, but we still want to continue it in a smaller scale and keep the groups all separated apart from each other. But I want to do more of them on Gabriola in the years to come because with the museum work that I've been doing, there's new opportunities rising up that I can do some more tours over there. Okay,
and Mitch said, I loved seeing the archival pictures along with your stories, Dave.
Awesome, that's so true. And anytime I have the opportunity to share older pictures, that's what I've been doing is collecting older pictures for many, many years. And maybe that's something I'll go into now is sharing a little bit of other stories of the areas, but also showing a photograph of those areas too. So the first one, is there any other questions first?
Not questions, some comment. Well, one question, a couple of comments. So let me go through those and then we'll get to the pictures.
Okay.
Excuse me. I enjoyed the teaching. Heather says, I enjoyed the teachings from animals and everything is a gift. Andrea, great to learn about the traditional uses of plants. Thanks. And Dawn from the museum has a question. Are you looking at doing any filming presentations done on Gabriola?
Filming presentations like documentation of the plants? Is that part of something that you might be interested in? You can nod your head. Yeah, because that would be something I'd love to work with the Arts Council, or we're planning to do some of that with the school, with Kate and with the school, with the project they got going on, and with the museum. I'd love to do that if we can document some stuff. We're looking at, when I had that meeting the other day with the museum, they want to enhance, they want to create a display at the downtown Nanaimo Museum about Saskatchewan, and they wanted to have my input of how to go about it. So I said, well, rather than having one large screen that's showing a loop of a video or something of it, why not put some more smaller iPads on there and have each one share individual stories and whatnot. And so that's something we could expand upon too. So I'm looking forward to doing some recordings for several different areas. And within Petroglyph Development Group that I work for, other individuals, Elliot Whitehill is one of the other workers, and he's written a book about Saskatchewan here. And so we're looking at doing further ones with that too, and got some great information. So it's still on the go in the future. Is there any other comments, Carol?
That's great for now.
Good. Okay, so you might hear a little bit of background noise here. There's those what do they call, the flickers, and they're trying to pick in the building on the outside. It's an old building and they figure there's food inside or something. Okay, so the next one I wanted to share with is an old photo I found from the archives from our collection of our community. And this is an old photo of Snuneymuxw, which is the reserve location at Departure Bay. And the picture is something important because they're doing a memorial in the photo, And the picture is of the families holding the photo up for that memorial. And this was prior, or just around 1900, 1890s, when someone had come there from the non-First Nations community and taken a photo of that. And it's just so much life in this photo to see the traditional regalia that people are wearing and part of the ceremony that they're doing. And so that's kind of something so unique. And we have several other old photos that are of that area. And I'm continually searching through family connections to find those photos too. Is there any thoughts or comments about that village site? Another area that I'm working with here is, or working with on Gabriola, is with having tours on Gabriola, having tours to our reserve site. This is the location down at the reserve, and those that have been able to be part of that event in the years past, it's been a real honor to share stories and bring people to the actual site, because it has a difference when we're talking about it and actually going to it and actually getting a group photo in front of that beautiful water view at the background there. So anytime I have the opportunities to do that, that's where I'm looking to expand upon our areas of recording, of interviewing and whatnot. Another one that I did with the Arts Council 3 years ago was we had created cedar baskets, and we had 28 people in 2 different groups sign up for making those cedar baskets, which was probably one of the hardest projects I had done because I realized after the first group that everyone has to make the exact same product. It cannot vary any difference, because if you give them opportunity to have a variety of things to make, everyone will make different items, which is part of the normal part of being artists. But it's easier to keep it all in coordination and everything if everyone's making the exact same thing. So it did turn out quite positive. And Mitch and his wife, Mitch's wife had made a basket with her son there too, and that was really neat. So other works that I've done with say Suchin Island, working with the kids at Gabriola, and then having the kids come over to say Sachin for a tour was something it meant so much, because they were just young children, but we had already had a previous contact. So being in contact with these kids and then having them come over to the island for a tour, it meant so much for me. And that was a really neat thing. That I think that happened 2 years ago with I think they're grade 5 children that came over, and that was with Lucas Laurie from the island there. And so the kids all wanting to get a group picture around the tree, because we did that same thing on Gabriola behind the commons there by the cedar trees. And so there was no cedar trees on the south end of say Sachin, but there was a Douglas fir, so they wanted to gather around it. Okay.
Just going back to the Degnan Bay Village, Sybil would like to know, was the site on the north side or the entire bay? And she also said making cedar baskets was so much fun. Hi, Chia.
Yes, I was. Yeah. Okay, so on Degnan Bay, there's still a reserve, which is down at the end of, is it Cooper Road, Kelly Road, that goes around, and it's right down the point down right beside where Dana lives down there, and she lives right next to it. And that was the reserve site. But there is a petroglyph on the other side, kind of by the boat is it a boat launch area? I can't remember exactly where, but there's a petroglyph there. So I really believe that there's people use the whole area of that, because it's a very rich harbor with the gravel being fairly coarse. It's a good place for oysters to get a grip on, and then oyster shells that stay there. So there's a lot of oysters there. And then there's a lot of sandy area where there's a lot of clams there too. And years ago, our reserve used to farm the clams and oysters there. And but some reason the project fell apart. There's still remnants of that clam and oyster farm that happened there, on the reserve area there. But I've only came here at the very end of it. I came in the year 2000 to that site for the first time to really actually see what they were doing there. And they were farming oysters and clams. So,
And Don just clarified that that's Rowan Road off
oh,
Cooper Drive.
that's right. Good thought. Yeah, remembering the names of them all. I remember how the zigzag through there, but I remember all the names. Yeah.
We have a question from Louise.
Yeah.
Burial Island is in Degnan Bay. Is that a Snuneymuxw burial site?
Yes, it is. It's no longer used as a burial site, but it is recognized as a burial site. That's our number 6 reserve. The land at the point there is our number 5 reserve, and the island is number 6 reserve. And so if anyone does see some boats landing there or people picnicking on there, someone said that they had got some photographs in the 70s of a group of people having a picnic on that island, not knowing that it was a burial island, I assume. But it's always be nice to try and find photographs of that, not in any way to do anything wrong of it, but just bring awareness of it and continually working with the communities in the best way we can. And now with modern day technology, we can turn our cell phone over to these things and catch a real good photo sometimes too. So.
And Andrea has a question. Was that a clam garden from old times?
Yes, it was. Yes, that was my ancestors farmed clams there for thousands and thousands of years, and oysters also. But there's also other foods, because anytime you see the seaweed bed where the seaweeds are, and in the right at the very edge of the reserve there, where it's right close to Valdez Island, there's sometimes long reeds of seaweed that come through there, and I've seen them myself. And those would be farmed. So some of those seaweeds are taken out, and then other ones would be transplanted to another area, because the waters are very rich there with all the plankton and things moving through the water. It's food for every kind of creature that lives in it. And so, of course, like I was sharing in the video earlier, that we would never go and harvest everything. We would only take small portions of it, and making sure that we're never going to abuse it in any way. We would only take what we need for that time. There's other things, when we see there is more of them, we will take more, but we've never been known that in our past ever to clear everything out, just a small portion of it. Okay. Any thoughts, comments?
No, you're good to go.
Good. Good. So when we say about the petroglyphs on there, I was looking for one of my photographs. I didn't have one handy of the petroglyphs on Gabriola, but I have a famous one that was is in our reserve here, and then the whole view of the petroglyphs here. And that's something I wanted to touch a little bit about, because when Geraldine shared about that 3 weeks ago about the petroglyphs, I didn't bring this photo along, but the photo is probably the clearest photo we have of the petroglyphs in Snuneymuxw here on the hill at Petroglyph Park. And I just recently had a tour there with parks. Last week I had a tour with 10 parks rangers from Vancouver Island, and we went to this exact site, and I shared the story about that. So if there's interest in that, I would be willing to share the story of that village site too. So always just trying to touch base of or looking for information from all areas. Bill White has been really good. He's a cousin of mine lives in Duncan. He sent me some documents that's showing at Holden Lake and Cedar by the Sea, where some of the petroglyphs there, that they have documents on it. So which was really good to have. And I'm always collecting old documents or old, if it be artifacts, to share with the future generations about this. As well as old photograph or old documents of petroglyphs and whatnot. We're always collecting old documents and old photographs of our families. And there's been an endless amount from the community that has come forward. And this is one of the actual first pictures that I've collected of from the community, and then being able to identify a few of the people in that photograph. And so it was really nice to see that there's an elderly lady on the right hand side of the picture here, and her mother was the daughter of my great grandfather's brother. And so there's a connection to the photo right away of my family ancestries to that. So anytime I find those photos, it has a neat feeling when I can find an actual ancestral connection.
Dave, we're just going to go back to the petroglyphs for a
Oh,
moment. Someone
okay.
has a question.
Okay.
Sybil is very interested in the story of that big petroglyph on Gabriola.
Oh, the wolf, the sea wolf. Oh, good. Okay, there's one. And that's part of when I'm doing storytelling too. If someone mentions something, that gives me the direction to go to, and that's what the elders shared with me. Never be set so firm in a direction that you can't lead to the side or go to the side and answer stories for share stories from individuals when someone has an interest in it. Okay, I'll see if I have that picture. No, I don't have it. So it is in a book here, but I won't run for it or anything. Okay, so the story goes that the transformation of that image is a transformation of the sea wolf. And so we have the story that many years ago, our scales, the transformer, have came in the form of an eagle on the north end of the island where there's a field, open area. And the eagle again is called the Yakwala. And he was flying and he seen a wolf in the fields. And the wolf was howling. And the wolf is called a stakea. And for those of you who have met me, I knew that I had a stakea. I used to have a wolf. So then this transformer seen this wolf howling in the fields, and he flew down and asked the wolf, why are you howling? Are you calling your family? Are you calling your friends? And the wolf looked up for a moment and said, no, I'm old and I'm hungry and I'm blind and I'm hoping someone will come and feed me. And the eagle said, I can help you. I can't feed you, but I can help you go to where the food is at. But you have to be willing to obey what I tell you to do and follow my instructions. So without hesitation, the wolf agreed right away that he would follow whatever the eagle told him to do. And so the eagle said, when you hear my name call, when you hear my voice call in the wind or in the sky, I want you to run towards my voice. And as I will call more frequently. And I want you to run faster and faster towards my voice. And I'll lead you to where the food is at. And the wolf was right away up, ready to start following the sound of the eagle. And as this eagle swooped around and started calling, that wolf started running faster and faster towards his voice. And as the eagle called more frequently, the wolf ran faster and faster. Well, unbeknownst to the wolf, the eagle was leading them to the edge of that field where there's a cliff that goes off into the ocean. And the wolf was running at full speed and still listening to the sound of the eagle and running towards his voice. And he ran right off the edge of that cliff and went right into the ocean. And when he went into the ocean, he dove down into the ocean. And when he came back up as the first killer whale. And that's the story of how the killer whale came to be, called the Kalhanamatsun. And the carving that's on the large rock that's in the center, the kind of the south area of the island, that was part of that transformation story, because that's a sea wolf, and a killer whale is often known as a sea wolf. And they travel in pods, and they're often by a female. They travel together with a female. Similar to the land wolf or the stakea, they're known as traveling in packs, and they're very family oriented. And they're very much a female and male leaders of those packs. So that's a little bit of our transformation story of that petroglyph that's in the center of the island. So is there any thoughts or comments about that?
Sybil said, beautiful story, Haichka.
Glad to share those. I'm really honored when someone asks about one of those, because it might bring about a story. And that's one of the main stories that I use on Gabriola when I'm doing the storytelling. Whenever I do the storytelling, like with Bo, because my business partner here is a canoe carver, I was bringing photos of the canoes for him to have a look at and to see But looking back to my times when I first came home, because a little bit of my past, I was raised in Port Alberni, and I knew my father and my mother, but because my mom married my father's English descent, she lost all of her native status. And that was how the laws were. And in 1985, the laws changed, and she was able to get her status back, plus the first generation children. So myself being that. But part of my life, I went and lived in Alberta for 13 years in Edmonton. And by my 13th year, I thought, why am I out here? It's like, this is way too cold. I'm going back to the coast. And so I came back, and now I can laugh about it, because the year I left, apparently friends of mine said, be glad you left this year, because on Canada Day, it was super cold that year. And we were watching the fireworks, and it started snowing. And overnight it snowed 7 or 8 inches on Canada Day. It just sounded so odd, but I laughed about it, because I said, out here it's beautiful. They have a polar bear swim. People go in the ocean in the winter. But more importantly, going back to the stories now, is I took some pictures in 1994, and this was one of the pictures in Departure Bay. It's the Ilnup, and I didn't know at the time the significance of this bay and the importance in our community. And now that I know about it, when the canoes come in and they have their paddles upwards like these ones do, that means they're coming in peace, and they're either coming to a feast or coming to a gathering. So when they get too close to the shore, they have to they have to group together like a big platoon, and then they have to ask for permission individually of whatever nation they're coming to. And this is what the tribal journeys are. And unfortunately, this year they had it canceled, but we were going to see over 100 canoes come to Snuneymuxw waters to our territories. But when I seen this one here, and I could see what it looked like hundreds of years ago, and if these canoes came in and they didn't have their paddles up, that would mean they're coming in a violent way and in an unfortunate way. And that happened in 1902, was the last time that it ever happened. The non-First Nations they already had a newspaper in Nanaimo called the Nanaimo Daily Free Press, and it had recorded the happenings of that. The words in the newspaper, I had seen it one time, it said, the non-natives stood in a gasp at the shore because they knew this wasn't their war. And it was a war between the Coast Salish and the people in the north. And right around that time, my great grandfather was given to the Snuneymuxw, given to the Coast Salish. So often I have to clarify that, because it's my mother's line that comes from the north. My mother's father's line is where I come from Snuneymuxw. And my ancestors, my great grandfather Lache is the name that I carry. And his ancestors were the creators of the petroglyph park. So they say we go back 10,000 years in Snuneymuxw, but 4,000 years ago, they made those petroglyphs. Well, when I go back to my great grandfather's history from the north, they come from a little place called Village Island, which is straight east of Port McNeill. And then very unique that they would have chosen this man, that he would be given to the Coast Salish in exchange for peace between the nations. And I'll go into that story, but I'll first ask, is there any comments or questions about the tribal journeys?
There are some. Andrea loves the stories about petroglyphs. Frida has a question. Are there stories in your songs too?
Oh, yes, every story, like that song that I sang on Say Such an Island in the video at the beginning, says, we are happy that you're able to be here. We're happy that you're able to be part of our gathering today. And that's the words that would continue. And we usually sing it 4 times, but most of the times I sing it 3 times. But that's part of our cultural way, is having songs that have messages to them. And there's stories that will go into that. So, and it's when I remember unique story of just that we think of those stories whenever I think of another story comes about. and I get a little bit off track on it sometimes, but excited about it though too. I remember my aunt, one of my aunts here told me one time, she says, I have a story for you that I want to tell because your grandfather was Abraham. My grandfather was Abraham Johnny. And it was on a Mother's Day, and he was getting quite elderly in his mid to late 80s. My grandfather lived to 98 years old, but in his late 80s, he went to a celebration which was at the local little church there. And it was a Mother's Day celebration. Him not being a mother, but not being able to really connect with the people, wanted to still come to the celebration. And they said, does anyone have any stories? So Grandpa stood up there, she said, and he went right up front and started telling the story. He said the story went that the Europeans came in their tall ships out in the harbor, similar to I was sharing in the video. And they went, our people went out by canoe, went out there, and we gathered around their big ship. And they felt they were going to be welcoming and give us some gifts. So on their paddles they had from their ship, they reached down and they placed some hard biscuits. I don't know what those rye biscuits were that they had the sailors, they call them sailor biscuits. And they would put them on these paddles and pass them to the First Nations in the canoes that were close to their boat. And our people reached up and tried those and tasted them. They said, it's like wood. It's all like cardboard. It's hard. And so then the people on the ship reached down in small bowls and passed some rice to our people. And if it wasn't cooked rice, it was dry rice. So our people took those bowls and tasted it. And they said, it's like sand. It's rocks. They're eating rocks. So then the story my grandpa shared was that the word came back to our people after they came back from the ship. Don't take anything from those people. They're giving us wood and rocks and gravel, and they're trying to get us to eat it. They're eating it out of bowls. And I always remember that. I just think of that hearing my grandfather tell that story with his hard of hearing, but him being in his late 80s to tell this at a Mother's Day gathering. So that was just a fun story I had to share about.
That was an excellent story.
Yeah. Thoughts or comments?
Yeah, two more comments. Two questions actually. So Heather would like to know, I'm hoping you might lead a tour of the petroglyphs behind the United Church. I hear there has been some talk of this. I look forward to it when it can happen.
Oh yes, yeah, that's one we've enjoyed many years, and that's the one where I showed that picture of the reserve. We had went to the petroglyphs prior to going to the reserve, and that was really a very received very positively. And if we can organize something through the Gabriola Arts Council, that would be real awesome to do that when the weather starts to turn nice, because those are, to get out to the locations is one area, but to travel to see the petroglyphs with a Snuneymuxw member, and that's been my job, to share the stories the best to my ability. It feels good for me, and I love doing it when there's an interest in it. That's what I'm all about. Good. Another question?
Excellent. Mitch has an excellent question. Dave, it's a full moon today, and I know that the Snuneymuxw culture was traditionally based around the moon's seasonal cycles. Could you talk about that? And do you personally work/live with the moon cycles?
Good question. That's a deep question. There's a whole day's topic right there. But the moons, more so the summer solstice, the winter solstice, the autumn equinox, and the spring equinox are very important times. The season changes, because when there's a full moon, that's when we say that's the time of the change too, because it's just on the cycle. Each month has it. But I do follow some. And one of the stories I can share about that was my great-grandfather, Lachea, was my mother's father's father. So it's my great-grandfather. And he used to travel when it's a full moon in the summer times, and they would travel to just south of Gabriola. If anyone knows the next island over, called Valdez Island, or they call it Layaxon, which is the reserve that's there. Along the west side of the island, there's an area called the Wall. and it's all rock, and it's probably maybe 60 to 100 feet, so 20 meters, 25 meters high. And in the middle of that wall, there's a area where the rock splits, and they call it a split in the wall. And at the full moon, my great grandfather was told that it's time, or he would tell the people it's time. We have to go there. And on that full moon, when it's a full moon, that's when the water's the highest, when we have our high tides. And so he would ride on a canoe and with other people, and he would be brought to that split in the wall, and he would go to the bow of the canoe, and at the highest time, it's in actually the V of the rock, is where that water reaches up to at high tide. And he would be brought to that, and from up above, other people would be waiting there. They would throw rope down, and rope was made out of cedar, and this rope would roll all the way down towards the water, and that his job was to grab that rope and climb all the way up. And when he climbed up there, would have their meetings. It would be like a monthly meeting, or when there's these full moons, because that's when the time was to share these meetings and talk about our future, of what the plans of our people are. And because my great grandfather was a very influential person in the community here and in the area, he was one of those people that traveled on that night of the full moon. So I thought, wow, it'd be interesting to what that experience would be like to climb up there by rope that was made by hand rope. And I make some rope now. I have some hanging on the Christmas tree behind me. I said I'm at the very edge of Christmas now, getting closer as I move the camera closer. So that's my story about the full moon, Mitch. I hope that helps. Any other thoughts or comments about that?
Heather commented on your answer to the petroglyph tour that it would be such an honor. And Louise loves hearing the story about the wall. It is a beautiful wall.
It is so true. I've had several times. I even actually had another time where I was on Valdez Island and with Layaxon as part of their culture, Layaxon Days, they call it. And we went to the cave that's behind that split in the wall. And it's an amazing journey. They say that cave goes under the ocean and it comes out on another island. So it's a very neat story to hear that. And we got to go in there, and I was traveling as a photographer, and there were 16 people that went through there. And we went to one side of the cave and we hiked in. And as soon as we came in, of course, because it's so dark, everyone had their little headlights on their headbands, and they're carrying flashlights. And here I was carrying my camera, taking pictures. And we got way down into the center of this cave area, and we seen a skeleton of a deer, and the deer, the hoppet we call it, had fallen from the top of the mountain there, and there's just remains of its skeleton left. And to travel through there, the little kids, of course, were way ahead of us with their flashlights and looking around there. And then as we were all working our way through as a group, remember 16 of us traveling together, we looked ahead, the kids were calling us, and we looked and they were directly up above us. But because the trail goes that way, it was so unique, because the split in this rock goes way down into the ocean, underneath the ocean. And they said you can actually go below the ocean on that trail. And while we were going through there, it felt like time had stood still, and we had taken all these pictures while traveling through this cave, and we ended up climbing out the top, and we were on top of that mountain up above the V on the split on the wall. And to see all these people make it through, no one had any injuries or anything. There were some times where we were tough trying to get through, because there's little small spaces we had to squeeze through there. Other areas we had to climb over rocks, and we would all help each other over, and we'd help each other through these areas. And it felt like we'd been in there for hours. It was just an odd feeling, because you're in that complete darkness too, right? And so I looked back on my camera and I looked at what time I took the picture, the first photo when I got in, and I looked at what time I took the last picture, and I've taken 50 or 60 photographs, and it was exactly 55 minutes. But it felt like hours had gone by, because when everything's so black, it just, you kind of lose track of that time, because we rely on the light so much, the sun so much. But it was a neat venture for us. to go and experience that. So, and that was something that I always treasure about the wall, going behind the wall on Valdez Island. So good. Any thoughts or comments about that?
Louise said, woohoo, cool.
Thank you. Yes, it was a neat venture, all right. Yeah. So I want to share a little bit of a story about it. Now, this one's harder for everyone to see, but on the top here is my grandmother's father and my grandmother's mother. So my grandmother's mother, she comes from Penelahette, Keeper Island. And that lady there, her mother came from Snuneymuxw. And so my great grandmother, she had traveled to Gabriola Reserve because of their ancestral family connections there. With her mother being from Snuneymuxw, her mother's would be her mother's first aunt was married to the reserve on Gabriola. And so the Jones family, which are in Nanaimo now and Snuneymuxw now, that's their ancestor. But these are the pictures of my grandmother's siblings. So my grandmother being the fourth oldest here, Emily was my grandmother. And then she was the fourth oldest of 10 children. The first one was born in 1887, and then the last one was born in 1914. So she had 26 years between 10 children. By the time her last baby was born, her oldest daughter already had 5 children. So there's a whole generation shift in our family. And the second youngest one, she's the one that lived the longest. She lived to 96 years old. And when she passed away, the family had asked me to build the funeral brochure for her because of that's something I've also done for the families. And then they asked me to do her eulogy, which was something very sacred in our community, to be called upon to do something like that, to share her whole life after 96 years of life. But amazing journey. So that's a little bit of on that side, on the mom side. But on the father's side, my great grandfather, his name was Lacuse or Lagus. He came from up in the north in the Kwakwakwa village. And he was given to Snuneymuxw in exchange for peace between the nations, that there be no more wars. And that was in around 1900. He had his naming potlatch down on our #1 reserve in 1900, and it went on for 1 month. So he had people out on the waters fishing, collecting clams and oysters, crustaceans and stuff. Had people in the hunting in the forest, people gathering vegetables, fruit, and feeding the people for 1 month as well. He had this potlatch. Snuneymuxw had never before seen a potlatch that went on for 1 month. One of the songs that he sang at his potlatch was called the 6-Day Song, and it lasted for 6 days. And so try and grasp singing more than an hour or singing more than a day, but to carry the song for 6 days. And that was the last time it was ever sung in my family. And so I'm now the one that carries those stories, that knowledge for the rest of my family. I'm one of 500 people on the south end of Vancouver Island that descend from this family member. So real honor to have that story. When I tracked his history, I got my DNA done, and it tells his wife was a direct line. She came from a place called Rivers Inlet, and that's where the River of Copper, they called it the River of Copper, and that's where her ancestor on her father's side came from. And her mother's side came from Fort Rupert, and then her grandfather came from Chilcote, Alaska. So I got the ancestry traced all the way back to Alaska. So that's a little bit of my history on my family on that side there. Any thoughts or comments about that? Because
We do have a question. Was he an adult when he was given for peace? And was the idea that he would replace someone who was killed during the war?
the idea that he would replace someone, I don't quite understand that part. He wasn't an adult, but tracking his history, this man here, his ancestors 300 years before him, one of his ancestors came from Snuneymuxw, and that name was Snuneymuxw, and we still carry that name in our community now, in our family. Kalemo was this man in the 1600s, and part of his family married to the Kwakwakwa, and it wasn't until 1900 until the son came back. And his marriage to the lady here from Penelakut was an arranged marriage. Same as some of the children. My grandmother, hers was an arranged marriage. Because when I say the lady here from Penelakut Island, her mom came from Snuneymuxw here. And my great grandmother, her brother was my grandfather's dad. So I have a connection on both sides of the family. And that was important prior to European contact and even up to European contact, to keep track of where the families are marrying to. My mom, when my mom was little, my mom didn't speak English. She learned English in elementary school, was her first time ever exposed to it. So that names of that family, when he was given as a gift here, it was because he descended from here, and that was chosen by the family. They said even though he was already had the first child in 1887, by 1900 that's when he would have that ceremony, and it was already decided by the family that they were going to do this. A lot of that brings another thought up of mine in my history, in my ancestry. A lot of our First Nations culture has been decided before we were even born. My elders told me that before I was born, it was already decided that I was going to be the one that would keep the history. And it's hard to grasp that in modern day way of thinking, but they knew our spirit prior to where we were born, before we were born. It's just, there's so much ancestral connection to our family that's so rich. And rather than try and question it and try and calculate it out, I've come to just accept that's how things were. And that's how I have to look at it in the future. That there's sometimes I see someone and I know that that descendant is going to be someone that I'm going to pass a name to, because that's my job later on, is to pass the stuff forward to the future generations. That opens up a whole nother area. So, any questions, comments, thoughts?
Andrea just clarified and said OIC, basically making stronger connections between the two sides.
So true. And that's something so important. And so what we do is to continue to recognize both sides of our family. My father's English. My father comes from 1,000 years of English history. And I feel that's important to share that too, to show that I'm the bridge between both nations. My mom's history is 10,000 years ago in Snuneymuxw here. And so where our heart is where we are. Someone said we're a Heinz 57. No, I don't believe that. You are, where your heart is. If your heart is in the community that you're working at, that's where you're from. You become from that area. Thoughts, comments?
I have a question. I don't quite know how to phrase it, but obviously there was no email. So how did they make arranged marriages so far apart? Like, well, how did the communication work?
Okay, good question. So when I showed that picture earlier of the canoes, the tribal journeys, the canoes, here's another one of the canoes here. The canoes, the oceans were our highways. When we wanted to travel to another community, it wasn't just travel for leisure. There's endless amounts of work projects. Simmer, Carol and I had a conversation. I looked through my notes before we all started this today to share. These are all the events I got on the go. There's thoughts I can share with you. That's what they did when they went to these communities. And it was an oral tradition. It was knowledge keepers. Someone's responsibility to keep track of all the things I have to speak at the next community. When I go there, remind me about this. And they would have different people. Everyone had a different task, that we weren't just along for the ride, so to speak. We had jobs to do. On these canoes, someone has a job of being the lead strokesman, like Bo was speaking on his speech about canoe pulling, that his grandfather would have been at the very front, and he was the first one. So he would set the pace for all the rest. And that person that would have that ability to set the pace for meetings, for gatherings, and there's many other things that they would have jobs of. The people at the back is the job is to steer it. They have this responsibility of keeping that canoe in line and getting the direction where they're going with it. And of course, conversing back and forth. That's how the stories happened. And that's how the arrangements were made from many long distances, because they said, we have a daughter up and coming someday. We need to have a marriage for her. We have a son that's lined up. They're the exact same age. We're going to arrange for those two to be married in the right time. So my mom's one of 9 children from her father. And I've got, at one time I counted between my mother's siblings and their kids and my father's siblings and his kids, I had 67 first cousins. So it's dwindled down quite a bit now, but that's how big it was at one time. Raises a whole nother area of genealogy. A family tree becomes a forest of families. So, any thoughts, comments?
Yes, a couple of comments. Sybil says, thank you for sharing more of your role. What gifts? And Heather said, thank you so much for that and all of the wisdom you've shared in your storytelling. She had to leave and she said, stay well.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate the feedback too, because as we're, when I'm sharing stories, there's so many areas of knowledge that can be learned from individuals that when I was saying I was sharing with Bo about anything about canoeing, when he was sharing his story about canoeing, his are the Coast Salish canoe carving. But when we see other works that even Bo has done, he didn't do this one, but this is one of a hide on a rim, on like a skeleton sort of frame, and you can see the ribs through the canoe, and it's a hide that's on top of it, sewn together. And I can imagine the amount of work to do something like that. Just absolutely amazing. And then one of the other pictures I shared showed Bo was the people called the Ainu, which are north of Japan. They traveled over here, and their canoe is sewn together from a flat log to a piece halfway up, and then the top piece. And they use rope and they sew it together. And I had never seen that before. And then when I look at their paddles, how different their paddles are, long, but every cultural teachings that they have are from their ancestors. Similar to the teachings that I have in Snuneymuxw here, they come from my ancestors here. But because I also have the English ancestry and the Kwakwaka'wakw ancestry, some of the teachings come from there too. And I'm quite connected to my family in the north. I've been assigned to record some of their potlatches over the years, and that's been a real honor too. So I'm learning of that culture, but learning of my own culture of Snuneymuxw, and then also carrying that, but also carrying my English ancestry too, because I track all that history all the way back to William the Conqueror too. So lots of history. That's part of the job of having, each of us having that job. We know where our direction is coming from. So comments?
Yes, we have a couple. So Dawn says, I guess that journeys would take a lot of thought and planning in advance.
Absolutely, absolutely. Years and years of planning. It was so unfortunate when we heard that ours was canceled, and now it's so unfortunate that next year's is canceled also. The family felt for the safety of their own people, they can't risk, because this is just too big of a thing to allow it to continue on, or allow the people to believe that we're going to host when there isn't even an end to this pandemic. So, but very unfortunate when things are canceled like that, because it took years and years of planning and huge amounts of money of communities traveling in advance to the previous location in order to invite people, because that's what another part of it is. When we go to gatherings like this, that family in that canoe will have an opportunity to take the floor and they will sing some songs that they have from their community, but they will also send an invitation out, even if it's 5 years or 6 years. I think they're booking 8 years in advance for the travel journeys. So they will have their speaker tell at that time that we're going to be hosting at this certain date, and we're inviting everyone to come, and we don't restrict and say only one from this community. We want everyone to come. And that's how it gets to be 10,000 people. I've been at in Lummi, Washington, where it's been as big as 10,000 people. So, thoughts or comments?
Frida has an excellent question. Can you say anything about how traditions and practices like the potlatch were preserved while they were forbidden?
Yes, there is some of that, and again, it's back to the truth and reconciliation. The truth and reconciliation area was that we want reconciliation as much as everyone else wants it, but we have to believe, hear sometimes the truth, and sometimes the truth is just, it can be ugly. The truth of how they did this ugly things to our people. But we've come over this now. We've changed from this in a new generation, and I believe that I'm part of that new wave of the new generation of people bringing these teachings that can. Snuneymuxw were known as basket weavers, and so for me to be weaving of any kind is something that my ancestors kept in that. And in 1900, or from 1886 until 1951, all the potlatches in Canada were banned because the government of Canada couldn't control them, and they felt that by banning them, they would be doing the Canadian better. And there was the words were even get rid of the Indian problem. So it was very derogatory the way they spoke about people. But nonetheless, they had came here, and while the potlatches were banned, they told our people they were having a potlatch, and our people should have seen that was something was a lie from the government. But they told them to bring their best baskets forward, and they brought their baskets, not knowing what the government was planning. But that Indian agent that worked for our reserve collected those baskets all together and threw them in the fire and burned them, and told the people, don't ever make these baskets again. And when I think of that, I think, what kind of a hurt could that feel upon our people? What kind of a devastation that would go for generations to come because of that action that they did purposely against our people. But we've turned the page now. We've turned to a new page now. We're moving in a new direction. So I'm one of a half a dozen people in Snuneymuxw that are weavers now, and I'm really honored to be included with the other weavers. Because when I first started weaving, I didn't feel I was good enough to be weaving with other people. I felt I got to learn this and get better before I even let anyone know I'm weaving. But I guess that's, as any artist, we're always willing to improve our work, and that's what I'm doing, is trying to continue to improve in this.
Do you have any of your hats handy to show us your weaving?
I do. The newest one I just made. So this is my newest creation with Russian trade beads. I found a string of them in Victoria, and I thought, hey, I got to make a zigzag around this hat. But this is the first hat in a while that I've made out of yellow cedar. And when I was on Gabriola, I looked at the baskets that they had in the museum, and I asked if I could look inside it to see what it looked like inside. And what my aunt had done was she had kept the outer cambium on the inner cedar. It's hard to explain it without someone seeing it and feeling the cedar, that there's an outer layer of cedar bark, and then there's the inner layer. This is the inner layer. But when we separate it, we can sometimes leave the outer layer on. So I chose to do that here. And instead of having it the white, I put that brown on it and wove that into it. And it turned out quite nice to do that. But the unique part of this hat, from the top down to halfway down, is called a triple weave. And I had never done a triple weave before. And inside, it's woven as fine a detail as the outside. because there's double strands inside. How they would do it in other times was layer this with pitch, and that could hold cold water because that's so tight of a weave. When you wet this, it starts to swell a little bit, and all those strands would seal right in. And so to create that, and the beautiful smell it is too. So it's just been a real honor, and my work is getting more and more detailed. When I said I can weave 1/20th of a weave of an inch now, and down to as large as 1/8 of an inch. I'm excited to see where my next one is. And my next project coming very soon behind me here is a loom that I received from a lady named Tawny on Gabriola. She gave me this 4-petal loom. And so within the next few days, I'm ready to start weaving. And it's going to open up a whole new area, but every strand will be this thin or thinner. So it's opening a new area of my work. And so I'm really honored to share those information. So if there's anyone's interested, I am selling my hat. So it's a little expensive though. The one I did before this one was when I came over and was in Yarl's class. She had the indigo class. And the indigo is the black. That's where the word India comes from. And so she'd asked that I bring some cedar over there. So she soaked it, dipped it in that indigo to get that black. So I wove that into my hat. And then I decided I'm going to change my hat to all yellow. So it has a little miniature red hat, and then the rest of it's all yellow. But to have that indigo in it and have it spread all the way around the hat had a neat feeling to it too. Again, each one of my hats, I'm working with them all to make a cedar headband in them and a strap on them so that they don't blow away in the wind. So, any thoughts or comments?
Yes, a few. Louise, when you talked about the baskets going into the fire, she wrote ouch.
Oh, yeah.
And then when you were showing your hat, she wrote beautiful.
Okay.
Andrew said, thank you for this chat today. I now have to leave till we meet again. And Dawn wants to know, what kind of material are you going to weave on your loom?
Oh, good. When Tawny gave it to me, she had left a whole bunch of, I think it's acrylic or cotton she had left on there. And so I'm retying those threads back up, and they are just threads. And so then I'll start to weave with that to start to figure out the petals and the pattern. But I have several spools of Coast Salish wool and of New Zealand wool. And I've been searching around because it's the only place you can seem to find those without paying $50 a spool is find it in the thrift store. So I've been looking, and 2 of them I found were brand new and never been opened. $1? Okay, I'll take that. So it's kind of unique, creating something that's from found items, so to speak. But I'm really honored to bring this new area of art to my own self. I have the blanket I was wearing in the video at the beginning. That one was made for me and gifted to me, and that's where my line is going to go with my work. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm nervous, but I'm looking forward to it. So.
It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah,
and Sybil wanted you to know, such beautiful work on the hats.
Thank
and Dawn said Heichka for your explanation.
Heichka, good. Okay, so I have one more small video to share. I wanted to share a little bit of the history of it first. When I had my wolf, I was walking in my fields of my land, and I came across an eagle. And the eagle was injured. And as I got closer to it, I seen definitely there's something wrong with that eagle. But I reached up when he was up above me, and I'd taken this picture of him. So I had a big long stick, and I reached up and I touched his claw. And if anyone's ever done that, you won't forget that. The feeling that I felt when I touched that eagle's claw, and that creature looked at me with his eye. It's something you can't forget so quickly. And so I had that opportunity to grab that eagle and rescue it, and then bring it to the Raptor Rescue Center in Duncan. Anyone knows of that area where they rescue the eagles. And they said it had a bullet in its wing. And so inside the wing, the bullet was still there. And so in the little video, you'll hear the sound of them on the operating table and him actually hitting the bullet, getting the bullet out of the wing of the, and just that feeling of that, if anyone knows about it, just sounded such an odd feeling. But it was neat that they came back with CTV and they said they're going to release the eagle, and they wanted me to set that eagle free. So my family's here. I'm on the side over here. My older sister's over here. My younger sister's way on the other side, and the CTV News is over here. So they had a few people. They told me, don't invite the whole reserve. We don't want 100 people. So I just invited a few families. So we had about a dozen people. And then the people from the Raptor Rescue Center were there. So if there isn't any other questions, Carol, could I get you to forward that or set that one up and play that one? Is it still there? It seems like a good way to kind of wrap up how we've been showing. Okay, here we go.
Flightless raptor has reclaimed its wings. 5 months ago, 2 eagles were found with bullet wounds. Only one survived. As CTV's Jessica Lepp reports, after a long recovery, Eddie the eagle is back in the air.
Carefully observing his surroundings, Eddie the eagle sets his sight on a new beginning. After one final look back at those who saved his life, off he goes, soaring into a second shot at life.
He recognized me, or someone who's helping his life back.
Dave Bodaly was walking this same trail in February when he spotted the injured bird.
He was struggling trying to fly to the trees, but he just got closer and closer to the ground.
So he captured the flightless animal, carefully wrapping the eagle in a coat before bringing him to the Raptor Rescue Society.
We took him up to our vet here in Nanaimo, so Dr. Langelier, and found out that after doing x-rays that he'd been shot.
His white parts were kind of mucky and grimy. His wings were a bit bedraggled.
After 4 hours on the operating table, the bullet that struck the raptor in the shoulder, piercing through its wing, was removed. Back at the Raptor Rescue Society, volunteers worked tirelessly, helping Eddie regain strength and learn how to use his 6-foot wingspan all over again.
He got pretty good about it. It was kind of like I'd go in there and I'd look at him sideways and he'd look at me sideways and I'd be like, yeah, you got to fly now.
A day shy of 5 months since his rescue, Eddie has returned to the same spot, only this time his rescuer sets him free.
We noticed when he was there, before he flew away, he heard the raven call. Spa, we call the raven. And for it to call, he looked and he knew he was home. This is his home. This is the trees he sat in. This is the trees where he was.
In Bodaly's First Nations culture, eagles are considered sacred and call them the watchers of the sky.
It's a great feeling. Definitely brings tears to your eyes when you see them be able to go back into the wild. After you've put so much, everybody's put so much effort into caring for this beautiful bird, and you never really know if it's going to work or not.
As Eddie's next chapter begins, one mystery remains unsolved. Who could shoot such a majestic bird and why? Jessica Lepp, CTV News, Nanaimo.
Great little video, and I always just love that when I first seen that and thought, oh my goodness, I was on CTV. Any thoughts about that or comments about it or anything? Or is that good? So I could carry on for probably quite a few more hours, but kind of we're losing a few people already. But I'm real honored again. What was the word? Haichka. And I'm honored to share with people about our culture. And I always have been told by my elders to please remember, in respect for Snuneymuxw and respect for our people, that these are Snuneymuxw stories. And that's what we always want to recognize. So we appreciate Haitseevka to each and all of you for coming and hearing my stories and listening to what I have, because I'm hoping in next months or so that we'll have some other unique stories to go with it. But we're all on a unique journey with this Zoom meetings now, and where we have to celebrate individually. And now with our Christmas coming up the next season to come up to be isolated the way people have been. It's a different world in many ways, but try and look towards that. We'll get through it. The good things are coming around the corner, and the new year will be coming after that. So, hi, Chika, again. Thank you. I really appreciate this. And I'll turn it over to Carol.
Thank you so much, Dave. I've really enjoyed working with you over this past little while, and I'm really excited about our next series as well. And it's tradition to give a handshake at the end of the presentation. And so we're going to do it virtually. So, hi, Chika. Hi, Chika. Hi, Chika.
Awesome. Good. Thank you for everyone. Any other thoughts or comments? No.
I think that's it for this afternoon.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely afternoon, and keep in touch about the presentations in 2021.
Okay, and I'll come and see you later this week, Carol. Okay, thank you. Okay, bye-bye.